What's goody with y'all today? My name is RayGVT, and today I'm here to figure out just what the heck is going on with the game that I love so much. Today we're diving deep into some of the biggest issues facing the Yu-Gi-Oh card game as of right now in 2024. Whether you're a seasoned veteran or just getting into the game as a new player, there's so much happening right now that you need to know about. From power creep to the rising cost of competitive play and the complexities of modern mechanics to the challenges of tournament accessibility, we're going to cover it all. Let's begin. So last year, I made a video titled The Many Complexities of the Yu-Gi-Oh Trading Card Game. In that video, I covered some of the biggest issues facing the game at the time. And looking back at that video, it's kinda sad to know that a lot of the things that I discussed there haven't changed too much. In fact, if anything, some of these things have gotten even worse. More than ever right now, the game of Yu-Gi-Oh is facing some extreme challenges which are keeping the game from growing and attracting new players. Many people have quit the game, and sometimes it feels like Konami just refuses to move when faced with these issues. So let's talk about some of the major things surrounding this game. So let's kick things off with one of the biggest topics that's been on everyone's minds, and that's power creep. If you've been playing Yu-Gi-Oh for a while, you've probably noticed that the power level of cards has been increasing with every new set. This isn't just a coincidence, it's a trend that's been accelerating over the years. To define it simply, power creep is when new cards are designed to be stronger than older cards, which in return often renders those older cards obsolete. This isn't in every single case, but this is just general. This can happen in several ways: higher attack points, more versatile effects, or mechanics that make previous strategies less viable. For example, let's take a look at how the attack points and effects of monsters have evolved over the years. Cards that were once considered game-changing are now easily outclassed by the latest releases. Cards that were considered big staples and must-haves have now been outclassed by more up-to-date cards with very similar effects but noticeably higher power levels. For many players, power creep is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it keeps the game fresh and interesting by introducing new strategies and mechanics, but on the other hand, it can make it difficult to keep up, especially if you've invested heavily in a deck that quickly becomes outdated, and we can talk more about that later. This constant need to update your deck just to stay competitive can be frustrating and expensive. Power creep also impacts the longevity of cards. In the past, certain cards would remain relevant for years, becoming staples in many decks. But today, the shelf life of a card can be much shorter. As new, more powerful cards are released, older cards that were once mainstays in the meta are pushed aside, sometimes just months after their release. What do you think about power creep in Yu-Gi-Oh? Is it necessary for the game's evolution, or is it making things too difficult for players? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Personally, I used to try my best to just ignore the issue, but we are at a point where it feels like it's just so out of hand. Especially since I've been investing a little more into the decks that I play this year with trying to play more competitively and stuff. But sound off on what you guys have to say about this below. Next, let's talk about the ban list, one of the most divisive aspects of the Yu-Gi-Oh community. Every few months, Konami updates the ban list, and each time it sparks intense debates among players. But why is the ban list so controversial? The ban list is designed to keep the game balanced by restricting or banning cards that are considered too powerful or disruptive to the meta. Well, that's what it's supposed to do. However, these decisions are often met with mixed reactions, to say the least. Some players feel that certain cards should be banned or limited, while others argue that the same cards should remain untouched. This divide creates a lot of tension in the community, especially when a key card in a popular deck gets hit. One of the biggest issues with the ban list is the absolute unpredictability of Konami's decisions. Sometimes cards that players have been calling to be banned for months remain legal, while others that seem perfectly balanced suddenly just get restricted. This inconsistency can lead to a lot of frustration, particularly when a deck that you've invested time and money into is suddenly no longer viable because of a ban list update. See, it's never an issue or a big deal until the deck that you play gets affected. Rest in peace, my Rockets. We lost our big boss to some shenanigans that weren't our fault. There's also the timing of these updates. Because the ban list doesn't follow a strict schedule, players are often left in suspense, wondering when the next update will drop and how it will impact the meta. This not only raises complaints in the community every single time, but the uncertainty can make it difficult to plan for the future, especially if you're trying to build or refine a deck for upcoming tournaments. At the end of the day, the ban list is a necessary tool for maintaining game balance, but it's far from perfect. It's a topic that's sure to keep the community talking and debating with each new updated list, but how do you guys feel about the current ban list? Are there any cards that you think should be banned or brought back? Let's talk about this for real. For me, I've for the most part been okay with previous lists, but I always have questions about a lot of decisions that are made by Konami and why exactly they had to ban or restrict certain cards that felt like they were doing just fine. At the time that this video is going up, we only just got an official statement of the release of the next ban list that's hitting on August 31st. This is after months of outcry from the community and feeling like Konami is just ignoring us, which isn't anything new, but at this point, something is better than nothing. But I do have to say though, on the side of the community, I feel like there's better ways that we can go about requesting ban list updates that don't involve, you know, the typical Yu-Gi-Oh community thing of crying and complaining and throwing out all these insane statements until we get what we want. I think that that's something that definitely needs to change, but we might talk about that a little bit more a little later on in this video. But moving on, another challenge facing Yu-Gi-Oh in 2024 is the increasing complexity of the game's mechanics. Over the years, the game has introduced a variety of new mechanics: synchro summoning, Xyz summoning, pendulum summoning, and link summoning. Each of these mechanics adds depth to the game, but they also contribute to making the game way more complex. For longtime players, these mechanics might feel like a natural evolution of the game. They offer new ways to strategize and can make duels more dynamic and interesting. However, for new players, the sheer number of mechanics can be overwhelming. Learning how each one works and how they interact with each other is no small task. This complexity can create a steep learning curve for newcomers. It's not just about understanding the basics anymore. New players now need to familiarize themselves with several different types of summoning mechanics, each with its own set of rules and strategies. This can be a lot to take in, especially when you're just starting out. But again, it's not just new players who are affected. Even experienced players can find the game's complexity daunting at times. With so many mechanics and interactions to keep track of, it's easy to make mistakes or overlook important details during a duel. This can lead to frustration and even discourage players from continuing to play. So, where does the balance lie? On one hand, the complexity of Yu-Gi-Oh! Is what makes it such a deep and rewarding game, in my opinion. On the other hand, if the learning curve becomes too steep, it could deter new players and even cause some veterans to step away. What's you guys' experience with this type of stuff? Because I know the experience can be very different depending on who you are and how you're coming at the game, whether you're a new player or whether you're a veteran. What's your experience with the complexity of Yu-Gi-Oh's mechanics? From the introduction of synchro summoning in 2008 to the more recent link summoning mechanic, Yu-Gi-Oh! Has continuously added layers of depth to the game. While this has made the game more strategic, it's also made it more challenging for players to keep up. And again, for veteran players, these mechanics feel like just a natural progression, but for newcomers, the learning curve can be really steep. Each mechanic comes with its own set of rules, and understanding how they interact with one another requires not just knowledge, but experience. Imagine being a new player trying to build your first deck, only to be faced with the daunting task of mastering multiple summoning methods right out of the gate. Now, of course, this isn't every single new player's experience, but this is something that a player will naturally have to learn over time, with learning how, synchros, Xyz, pendulums, and links all work, whether you play those decks or not. And also, again, this complexity doesn't just affect new players. Even experienced duelists can find themselves overwhelmed by the sheer number of interactions and possibilities in a single game. The introduction of each new mechanic often requires players to rethink their strategies and adapt to the latest trends, which can be both exciting and exhausting. Moreover, the rules surrounding these mechanics are not always intuitive. For example, Link Summoning drastically changed how the extra deck was utilized, and Pendulum Summoning introduced a completely new way to manage monsters on the field. Keeping track of all these changes and making sure you're following the latest rules can be a challenge, even for seasoned players. So while these mechanics add a lot of depth to Yu-Gi-Oh!, they also raise the barrier to entry. New players might feel overwhelmed, and even veteran players can struggle to stay on top of the evolving meta. The question is, how can Konami make the game accessible without sacrificing the complexity that makes Yu-Gi-Oh! Unique? Now, I'm definitely not against any of these new mechanics that have been introduced over the years. I'm not a Pendulum hater or anti-Links. No, I don't think Pendulum or Link monsters ruined Yu-Gi-Oh! But I will also admit that the game doesn't get easier to learn because of them. Historically, I've received these mechanics very well, ever since the Zexal era and when Xyz cards were introduced. But with each new mechanic introduced comes a level of learning that you have to adapt to if you want to continue to improve at the game. Because with so many options available for deck variety, you have to be prepared to face anything. In my last video on this topic of the many complexities of the Yu-Gi-Oh! TCG, I stated that the rule set is what contributes to this game being so complex and sometimes unapproachable. The rules of the game are very easy to understand at a surface level, but after you play for a bit, you need to start learning all the other rules surrounding various mechanics and certain situations. There's a lot of unspoken rules about the game, and this is what makes the game so complicated. Personally, I love seeing all this come together in a match, and there's a beauty in high-level Yu-Gi-Oh! That makes you really appreciate the skill that it takes to know all of these different things surrounding it. And even though I'm not a high-level player myself, I can appreciate it still. But I understand how for the new player, something like this can be extra daunting. It just doesn't look fun, and I get that. But that's just what the game is today, for better or worse. Now, let's dive into a topic that hits close to home for many duelists, and that's the cost of competitive play, or just the cost of the game in general. This is a big one that I feel like deserves a video on its own. This is an issue that's becoming increasingly prominent in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community. If you've been in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Scene for any length of time, you know that building a top-tier deck can be an expensive endeavor and task. But in recent years, the cost of staying competitive has reached insane new heights. Now, building a top-tier deck has always required an investment, but in recent years, the cost has escalated so dramatically. One of the primary reasons for this is power creep, as we discussed earlier. New powerful cards are constantly being released, and if you want to stay competitive, you need to have the latest and greatest in your deck. Or you feel like you need to have the latest and greatest in your deck. Power creep means that older cards are often outclassed by new releases. This creates a cycle where players feel pressured to constantly buy the latest cards just to keep up with the evolving meta. And with new sets being released so frequently, the financial strain can add up very quickly. And these new cards don't come cheap. As demand for the most effective cards increases, so does their price, often making them inaccessible to players on a budget. I can say this for myself from experience. And it's not just about buying singles either. The rise of the secondary market has turned certain cards into valuable commodities with prices that can skyrocket based on their performance in the meta. A card that was affordable one day can become prohibitively expensive the next, simply because it's now a staple in a popular deck. This can be incredibly frustrating, especially for players who are trying to compete without breaking the bank. And it's not uncommon to see staple cards selling for lots of dollars, making it difficult for players on a budget to afford them. The financial barrier doesn't just affect individual players, it also influences the health of the game as a whole. When the cost of entry is too high, it discourages new players from joining the competitive scene. It also creates a disparity between those who can afford to buy the best cards and those who can't, leading to an uneven playing field. The idea of spending hundreds or even thousands of dollars, as I've seen from a few people, to build a competitive deck can be super overwhelming, and it might deter from playing at a higher level. But even for experienced players, the constant need to invest in new cards can lead to burnout. I genuinely believe that it should never be okay at any point ever, this is for any TCG, at any point ever, for a single card to cost upwards of $60, $70, or $80 and up. Like, no, that's ridiculous. Are you kidding me? You can genuinely build a whole decks for that same price. Yeah, they're lower tier or rogue decks, but it's still more value at the end of the day, in my opinion. And for the same price of building a deck that can compete in the meta, you can buy more in other card games too. But that's a topic that I'm not gonna go too deep into right here. So what can be done about all of this? One solution could be more frequent reprints of key cards to help bring down prices, making them more accessible to everyone. Another option might be focusing on balance, ensuring that no single card becomes so essential that it drives up costs across the board. What's you guys' take on all of this? How do you manage the cost of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Competitively? Share your strategies in the comments because we all want to hear it. Over here where I live, we don't have access to TCG Player anymore, not since COVID anyway. So my only options of getting cards are eBay and a couple of other external card selling sites which aren't always very reliable. So it's always such a massive hassle trying to find cards for good prices. I'm part of a few buy and sell groups and stuff, but you also have to be really careful with these things a lot of the times. Combined, it all just makes for a big headache just to be able to get the cards that I'm looking for at decent prices. This is also the reason why my deck profiles come out very spaced out, because I'm trying to get these cards and I'm trying to look for the best places and the best sites for getting this card and that card for the best price. And yeah, it's just not a fun experience a lot of the times. And we haven't even talked about pull rates and short printing yet. Also, the average price of a Yu-Gi-Oh! Booster box has increased noticeably over the years since I begun playing again in 2020. What used to cost like 90 bucks for a booster will now run you like $120 to $130. I get that inflation is an unfortunate thing, but this just adds to it so much more. It's also for this very reason why I don't do nearly as many pack unboxing streams as I used to in the past. Seriously, I used to do this stuff like once or twice a month back in my excitement of returning to the game. But now, it's rare if I ever do one at all for months. But anyways, I know this all sounds like that's a you problem, bro. But all these things really add up to make for a rough experience, especially for newer players. And finally, let's talk about tournament accessibility. Competing in Yu-Gi-Oh! Tournaments is one of the most exciting parts of the game, but for many players, getting to those events is becoming more difficult. One of the biggest challenges is the physical distance to major events. Regional and national tournaments are often held in major cities, which can be far from where many players live. Not all, but most. For those who don't live near these locations, attending a tournament can mean long drives, expensive flights, and hotel stays, making it difficult, if not impossible, for some players to participate. Even when players do manage to attend, the cost doesn't stop at travel and accommodation. There's entry fees, the cost of keeping your deck competitive, and sometimes even the need to take time off work or school. All of these factors add up, and for some players, the financial and logistical barriers are just too high. Now, this stuff does just kind of come down to the individual person and how you kind of just have to manage these things yourself. But another issue is the limited number of events. While Yu-Gi-Oh! Has a global following, the number of high-level tournaments is relatively small compared to the size of the player base. This means that not everyone who wants to compete at a high level has the opportunity to do so. The result is that many skilled players might never get the chance to showcase their abilities on a larger stage. So what's the solution? One potential answer is to, well, the obvious: increase the number of regional and local tournaments, making competitive play more accessible to a wider range of players. Another approach could be expanding online tournaments like those in Master Duel, which allow players to compete from the comfort of their own homes. While this doesn't replace the experience of a live event, it does offer a more accessible option for those who can't travel. Ultimately, the goal should be to ensure that every player who wants to compete at a high level has the opportunity to do so regardless of where they live or how much money they have. What are your thoughts on tournament accessibility in Yu-Gi-Oh? Have you guys faced challenges trying to attend events? Let's talk about it. I really hate the fact that certain regions like Oceania and Europe are always getting shafted when it comes to this. We're either getting like one major YCS event a year that's not even being covered anywhere, or even worse, none at all, as has been the case for Europe for a while now. Please, just give us a little more, or just give us something. And speaking of giving us something, can we talk about price support for just a little bit? Just a little bit. It is insane how low the quality quality of prizes for topping and winning in these events still is. This is something that's been talked about to death already, but I'm gonna talk about it a little bit here anyway. We should be way past the point of just Nintendo Switches and a vanilla card as a prize. Give us something real. Other TCGs have way better prizes for just entering and participating, and meanwhile we're over here starving for anything worthwhile. Imagine working your butt off to be the best player in the world and then receiving the most mid prize to show for all your efforts. There's multiple solutions to this that don't involve cash pricing but can still be super worth the effort for players. But please, something needs to be done better here because this is just crazy at this point. But anyways, there you have it, some of the biggest challenges facing Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2024. From the complexity of modern mechanics to the rising cost of competitive play and the accessibility of tournaments, there's a lot for the community to consider. But with awareness and discussion, we can work together to find solutions and keep the game that we love thriving and going. I've said it before so many times and I'll say it again. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is my favorite game in the world. It's been such a big part of my life and at nearly every single point of my life too. I've loved seeing the game grow and evolve over the years. It was a big reason why I decided to start streaming ages ago and making content after multiple failed attempts to find my footing with other things on the internet. I really want to see the game do well and continue to thrive, but that can't happen if issues that have been around for ages aren't getting addressed. I can't lie, it's hard to ignore a lot of these issues too and enjoy the game and just pretend like nothing's happening. So it's important that we as the community continue to speak up and out about these problems surrounding the game. And speaking of community, how about we as a community also change the way we act about certain things too? One other major issue that I've found just in my personal experience of playing this over the years is that the community can sometimes be extremely unlikable when it comes to certain things like deck choices and card options and communicating things with Konami on social media and stuff like that. The number of times that I've put up to just play the game and just have fun without wanting to think and getting hit with all these comments of, why are you playing this deck and are you really running with that, bro? Has been too many times to count now. And I see this happen everywhere too. I've experienced this both in person and online, and I see it happen to many others online too. Like, you gotta let people play how they want. That's the beauty and the fun of this game. Not everyone is a competitive player, and also not everyone is just casual. I get that. So all I'm saying is that we as a community could stand to just be a little more respectful sometimes. If you got something to say it. At least in a respectful way, you know? Like, I get that we're the player base and we have, you know, every right to demand certain things from Konami, but sometimes the way some of you guys be communicating is just a little bit like calm down. Like, please, calm down. There's better ways to get your message across than, you know, how you're saying it immediately in the heat of the moment. That's all I'm gonna say about that. Like, for this whole recent ban list for August 31st, like, the way people are going crazy on Twitter and their super crazy takes on, oh my gosh, Konami, you need to do this or else, or why haven't they done this, and, you know, people making these insane demands and talking crazy and stuff. Like, okay, dog, like, you can do better. We could do better, honestly. This is just kind of sad, honestly. This is also why a lot of people see the Yu-Gi-Oh community as maybe a little bit degen sometimes, because it's like, we have something to say, but it's the way that we say it, you know? Like, it's fine to say what you want to say, but think about how you're gonna say it. Anyways, that's all I'm gonna say about that. This is a whole separate topic for maybe a separate video, but I'm just gonna leave it at that. I'm just gonna leave it at that for you guys to think about. But I will say that the good does outweigh the bad a lot of the times, and for every negative experience that I've had just as many more positive ones too. For me, creating a community right here on my platforms has been awesome, and I really hope to continue growing too. But anyways, guys, that's gonna be all for me today. I just had to get that last part out because sometimes the issues facing this game aren't all on the company. Sometimes we as players and as the fans could do a little bit better. But again, that's all I'm gonna say about that. What do you guys think of all these things that have been discussed in this video? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I really enjoy making these discussion types of videos. I know I say that all the time, but really, it's always so much fun whenever I get to sit down and actually make one of these videos. So feel free to sound off and give your own feedback. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I will see you guys in the duel arena.